Okay, creative writing 11 plus CSSE style. So today is all about talking you through the question format and timing, the marking criteria, as well as some last minute tips. So creative writing is one of those things that crops up as being one of those vague areas where maybe parents feel less confident in supporting their child, which, let's be honest, it's because it's not so clear cut. So subjects like maths, they're a lot easier to support at home, but creative writing is one of those things. It's a bit vague, a little bit ambiguous. So the idea of this today is to build your confidence as a parent in supporting your child, and also your child's confidence. Okay, so knowing which kind of tips and techniques they can apply to their writing. Okay, the first half of this session is going through the questions and the marking criteria. So some of this information you may already know, and that's absolutely fine. But it's still necessary information because we are going to be using that information for the second part of today's session, which is last minute tips. Okay, let's get started. So the exam format itself, the CSSE English exam, we have a comprehension section. We then have an applied reasoning section, otherwise known as verbal reasoning. And we finally have the continuous writing section. Now let's have a look at some timings. Comprehension, your child will get 30 minutes to answer the questions, plus 10 minutes reading time. And within the comprehension section is also a large number of marks, usually 11 or 12 marks out of 60, just for vocabulary, so providing synonyms for different words throughout the passage. The applied reasoning section or verbal reasoning is 10 minutes long, and then the continuous writing is 20 minutes. So the continuous writing section, which I'm going to talk about today, is made up of 2 separate questions. And there is a total of 15 marks for both questions. Both questions are marked almost as a whole, okay? So the fact these 15 marks are for both questions prove to us that consistency is key. Your child must be consistent in both pieces of writing to stand a good chance of getting a high level of marks, okay? And that's what we're all looking for. So let's have a look at the questions. I'm just going to have a glance at the comments. To stand a good chance of getting... Okay. Yeah, so lots of highs from people. Okay, let's have a look at the question format. So what I've tried to do is represent these questions, not just like a question 1 or a question 2, because they might change, and question 1 may have different things than the question 1 the following year. Okay, but the key to remember with these 2 questions is that 1 is a little bit more realistic or based on things that are real life, and the other one is more imaginary. So I've represented them almost like 2 separate countries, okay? They're close together, but they're asking for different things. That's the key point to remember. So on the left-hand side, we have the realistic question, okay? And you can see here the skills that we're looking for. We're having to use our brains with logic. There may be some kind of list or some kind of structure, like a numbered structure involved, but you may also be able to include some creativity. Okay, it doesn't mean that you can't include the creativity, you can't include writer's techniques. It just means that this question is going to be a little bit more realistic. Okay, now let's look at the right-hand side, the imaginary question. Now here, I've purposefully put some of the same skills. So we have this guy here with the light bulb and all of his different thoughts. We also have the paint palette talking about creativity. And then we have the wizard's hat. So we're talking about magic or imaginary things. Okay, these are all things that we are going to kind of make up. We're going to hypothesize them in our heads. Okay, so that's the main difference between these questions. Now, what links these two questions together in giving us the best chance of a high level of marks? It is, of course, spelling, punctuation, and grammar. These three things have to be pretty accurate in both questions. And this is what I mean when we're talking about consistency. Okay, so we have to be consistent. We have to make sure our spellings are okay. We have to make sure that punctuation is used correctly and maybe even creatively. And then grammar, we want our writing to make sense. Okay, because after all, the examiner is going to be reading through reams and reams of questions. So they want something quite captivating for both questions. So SPAG is the bridge linking these two countries together. We do have some similar skills on each of them, but the main difference is that one is realistic and one is imaginary. Now, examples. A realistic question is going to be something like talk about or explain your favorite time in the year. Okay, it's realistic. Your child will have experienced this. They will know deep down what their favorite time of year is, whether it's birthday, Christmas, some kind of festival. Okay, and an imaginary question is going to be something like, describe a present that you would most like to be given. Now, this is imaginary. This hasn't happened in your child's life. So they have to kind of think about their experience and then put that experience into their answer. Okay, but it is imaginary. It's not real. So they can be a little bit more creative if they want to. Okay, let's move on. So just going to show you some past paper questions. Now, the first set of questions, these are from 2018. And you can see on the left-hand side, we have a question that says, aim to write 6 or 7 sentences and explain what is your favourite part of a school day. Now, this is what I'm talking about with the realism and being realistic. Your child most probably goes to school. Your child will know their favourite part of their school day, okay? And I guess most kids would say break time or lunchtime or even when school finishes. But it's realistic and they can draw on their own experiences to help answer that question, okay? On the right-hand side, we have aim to write 6 or 7 sentences. Describe what superpower you would best like to have and why. Now, this is something completely imaginary and it's really, really focusing on your child's ability to be creative and to talk about things that are almost like abstract. It's outside of what they know. So they have to really put their thinking caps on and be imaginative. Okay. Let's move on to the next questions. 2019 questions. Explain what is your favourite time in the whole year. You should aim to write at least 6 sentences. Okay, what do you guys think most kids are going to answer? What do we think most kids are going to answer? Because I can bet you, I mean, I've done this question with so many of the students that I teach, and it's either birthdays, it's either Christmas, or it's either some kind of festival or summer holidays. And if there is any kind of advice that I could give a child who's going to answer this question when so many other kids are also answering this question, is think about something that most kids are going to answer and choose something different. So if you think most kids are going to say Christmas or birthdays, choose something different. Go for something that you can, it will make your writing stand out. You can really be imaginative and be descriptive with it, and you can explain why it's your favourite time of year. That's going to make sure that your writing stands out compared to other children. And I can see everyone commenting now. We've got holidays, Christmas, birthdays, festivals, receiving presents. Exactly. We all know our children, right? And this is, just a key part of advice. Before we move on to tips, this is a key part of advice. Think about something that most kids are going to write and go for the opposite, okay? So you might decide that you're going to write about winter. Who's going to write about winter? Not many people, because not many people enjoy winter. So go for something that is different. Okay. On the right-hand side, describe what gift or present you would most like to be given. You should aim to write at least 6 sentences. So we're talking imaginary, okay? A gift or present that you would most like, it's conditional, you would most like to be given. So this isn't something that your child has already received. This is a gift or present that they think, wow, if I was to receive that, I would be so ecstatic. It would be amazing to be given that. Okay, and also the key purpose here is to describe. So we're kind of using all of those writer techniques, similes, metaphors. We want some vivid vocabulary there. Okay, so these are the differences. Main difference, one question is based on realism or being realistic, something that's real life that your child will know very well. And the other question is something that maybe your child has to really sit and think about and put a bit more thought into. Okay. Moving on. So, marking criteria. Now, the CSSE are quite kind of open with how they mark. Their marking criteria is available on their website, and we are going to see that in a moment. But these are the 5 areas that they use to mark your child's writing. Okay, so we have ideas, we have grammar, we have structure, we have vocabulary and spelling, we have punctuation. Now you can jot these down if you like. Ideas, we're talking about if your child has actually answered the question. So if it's describing a present they would most like to be given, have they described a present, or have they described something ridiculous, okay? Or have they gone off track and spoken about something they would hate to be given? Sounds silly, but it is a thing, okay? Grammar. So do sentences make sense? Are there any words that are missing out? And also, are the tenses secure? Tenses are completely overlooked sometimes. Choosing the right tense and then sticking to that tense is just so important. Structure. Have you structured your writing effectively? So have you used things like paragraphs, conjunctions? Have you varied the pace a little? So if you're doing something descriptive, we don't just want lots and lots of complex sentences full of description, full of devices, okay, and full of subordinate clauses and things like that. We want a varying of pace, so swap it up a little. Start with a complex sentence, move to a compound sentence, then maybe put in a simple sentence, just a very short sentence, okay, for effect. It varies the pace. You think about how I'm speaking. I'm not speaking in the same way the whole time that I'm presenting this. I vary it a little. Sometimes I slow down, sometimes I speed up, sometimes I pause. Our writing has to be exactly the same. Okay, vocab and spelling kind of does what it says on the tin. Vocabulary needs to be ambitious, but listen, there is a very, very fine line between being ambitious with vocab and then overdoing it, okay? And what that means is if your child just puts in lots and lots of rich vocabulary, sometimes the reader can get a little, well, they have to slow down, they have to pause, they might have to reread something, okay? It's not so effective. Whereas if your child uses the right vocabulary in the right place for effect, it's a lot more effective, and the examiner will really appreciate that. Spellings, the general rule with the CSSE is that all basic spellings, okay, spellings as in key spellings that your child will be covering at school, so Key Stage 2, Year 5, Year 6 spellings, the basic spellings with prefixes and suffixes will be correct, okay? If your child is trying to spell something like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious and they get it wrong, the examiner is not going to discount marks. They're not going to say, oh, well, they can't spell this, so I'm going to mark them down. That's not going to happen, okay? We are just looking for an overall good kind of spelling. Lastly, punctuation. The last thing that the examiner wants to see is just commas and full stops, okay? They want to see that your child knows about the other types of punctuation, can use them in the right place, and can maybe get creative with them sometimes. So if they're trying to build suspense, maybe the 3 dots, an ellipsis, dun, 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 okay? It's going to be a lot better than just a full stop. So kind of having fun with it as well. So these are the 5 areas, guys. I'm just checking out the comments. Yep, so vary the length and complexity of sentences, definitely. Use words you know, yes, that too. Literary devices. Okay. Yeah, good. Good. Okay, right, let's move on. This is the CSSE mark scheme. Okay, this is the actual mark scheme. And you can see that it's split up into the 5 areas. So the 5 areas are on the left-hand side. And then at the top, you should be able to see that there are bands. There's band 4, 3, 2, 1. Band 4 is the best you can get. Band 1, the worst. So you can pick out some things that the CSSE are looking for within these exams and the creative writing. Band 1, incoherent ideas that may be entirely irrelevant to the task. Writing is unrelated to the intended purpose. Vocab, limited clarity in choice of vocab, limited accuracy with spelling. Structure, no paragraphs and no sentence structure, really key point and often gets overlooked. And finally, limited punctuation. So that is the kind of worst that you would be looking for. This is when they would probably award maybe 2 or 3 marks out of 15. So this is what we're aiming for. Band 4. And this is what we're aiming for in each area. So ideas, we want clear and original writing. It needs to be securely focused on the task, and the ideas need to be explored in depth. Grammar, secure tenses throughout. Structure, securely structured, clear sense of direction, connectives used appropriately, paragraphs used accurately, and varied sentence structure. Vocab and spelling, ambitious vocabulary, and accurate spelling for all basic vocabulary. Punctuation. Varied punctuation, used creatively and accurately. Okay, this is if we wanted to score maybe 13, 14, 15 marks out of 15, this is what we're looking for. Okay, and let's not forget that these things are kind of drawn from the national curriculum. So your child will have learnt these things at school, year 4, year 5, and obviously going into year 6. So they will have learnt these things. Okay. Now for my tips. And I'm really, really hoping that you guys can take a lot from this. Because I know that creative writing is just so ambiguous. And it's really, really hard to know how to get it right. So aside from the things that we've just gone through with the marking criteria, these are my Super 7 last minute tips. And if you want to screenshot, you want to take notes, then please, please do. Please feel free. I'm just going to move my face. Okay, just catching up on comments. Okay, tip number 1, identify the purpose of each question and underline it. So when your child is practicing questions at home, or they first start looking at questions, or even once they're sitting in the exam, they should identify the purpose of each question, because the purpose will almost certainly be different for each question. And when we're talking about purpose, we're talking about, are you being asked to instruct, explain, recount, describe? In other exams, so independent exams, ISEB, we may be asked to persuade, we may be asked to review, or even discuss. Okay, but for CSSE, they've been quite consistent in that it's usually instruct, recount, explain, describe. Okay, it's not limited to those. They could always throw something else in, but these are the main kind of purposes. So your child should underline the purpose. It will be just 1 or 2 words. Make sure that you look out for a possible second purpose of the question. So when we were looking at past questions, there was one there to describe what present you would most like to be given and explain why. Describe it and explain it. 2 separate things, and they should be telling us which skills and which tools we need for the job. Which brings me on to my next tip. Tip number 2. I'm going to move myself down again. Choose the right tools for the job. Choose the right tools for the job. So if we're being asked to instruct, we want a step-by-step. It needs to be concise and easy to follow. And we might have adverbs. We might have modal verbs, bossy verbs, imperative verbs. Okay. Recount, past tense. A recount is when we're talking about something that's happened in the past. If we recount an event, we're talking about something that's happened in the past. So it's as if you're telling a story about something that's happened. So we want past tense, just as if you were recounting something to a relative or a friend. If they said, oh, tell me about your day at school, you would talk about it in the past tense. It would be chronological. Okay, it would be in order of the events that have happened. You might include some description, and it's absolutely fine to go to town with the description if you want to, especially when it comes to emotions. Okay. Next up, explaining. So explaining something is not the same as describing it, and children can get really confused. So explaining something, why do you feel a certain way? It's no different when we're asked to explain something in comprehension. You know, choose a simile from the passage and explain what it means, or explain why it's effective. It's as if you're standing in front of a judge having to argue a point. Okay, it's not persuasive necessarily, but you are definitely having to give a point and then give a reason. Okay. Lastly, describing. Now, describing anything, whether it's a person, if it's an object, if it's a time that you felt something, we want to focus on imagery. We want to build imagery. That's what writers' techniques are all about. So the 5 senses are really, really handy when it comes to describing, as well as techniques. Now, I use something with my students called SPAMO, and I'm guessing you will know what it stands for, but for those that don't, it's simile, personification, alliteration, metaphor, onomatopoeia. And I've just basically condensed it down to the 5 main things that I feel are most effective when you're trying to build imagery. Someone has just asked, by the way, for instructional writing, whether it's best to use bullet points or numbers. Now, CSSE, the questions ask you to write in 6 or 7 sentences. So one of the past questions was, in 6 or 7 sentences, instruct a friend how to prepare for painting a picture. So we don't really want bullet points because it's technically not sentences. So we want to keep it to sentences. We can still provide instructions using sentences. So firstly, prepare your workstation, full stop. Secondly, okay, and so on. Okay, so description, SPAMO, 5 senses, building imagery in the reader's mind. We have to choose the right tools for our job. So that's point number 2. Okay, let's move on. Okay, this is tip number 3. Choose effective vocabulary, quality over quantity. So this is kind of what I was, similar to what I was saying earlier, which is we don't want lots and lots of really rich vocabulary because it will almost just put the reader off. It will have to make them stop in their tracks and maybe reread things. We don't want that. We want the writing to flow. So use the right vocab, okay, as opposed to just lots and lots. of big words. So here's an example question. Describe one of your relatives and explain what you like about that person. So first of all, the purpose. We have two key things that we've been asked to do here. We have describe and we have explain. Now, let's take a grandmother. The key word is explain what we like about that person. So we want some positive vocabulary. I'm just going to show you exactly what I mean. So common phrases that will have negative associations. Okay, these are things that kids might say about their grandmother. My elderly grandmother has colossal wrinkles all over her face and her hair is as wiry as a bird's nest. Okay. Basically, the child is trying to say that the grandmother is old, wrinkly, and her hair is messy. So let's transform this. This is what I'm saying with the right vocab, the most effective vocab. This can be transformed into delicate creases decorate my grandmother's wise face, and her precious wisps of metallic grey hair sit faultlessly at the top of her head. Now we're using vocab like delicate. Delicate can mean fragile, but it can have a positive association. Delicate creases. We've not said wrinkles. Wrinkles have that negative association, as if it's a bad thing to get old. Whereas we're talking about delicate creases, we're saying that they decorate the grandmother's wise face. Now, wise, a grandmother will be wise, okay, because she is old. She has lots of experience. But rather than saying old or elderly, we've said wise. Delicate creases decorate my grandmother's wise face, and her precious wisps of metallic grey hair. Precious, again, a real positive word. It's like you really treasure her. Precious wisps. Wisps has no negative association. We're just talking about how the hair falls. Of metallic grey hair, again, neutral. You could go for something else as well, as long as it's not negative. They sit faultlessly at the top of her head. Faultlessly. It's as if they're meant to be there. They're perfect. The way that hair sits on her head is perfect. Rather than saying her hair is as wiry as a bird's nest, we're saying that her precious hair sits faultlessly at the top of her head. Okay, so that's point number 3, using the most appropriate, effective vocabulary. Okay. Point number 4. Just going to have a sip of my drink. Okay. So tip number 4, choose your tense and stick to it. So I'm using a recount just as an example. Remember, a recount, we said, is as if we're talking about an event that's already happened. Past tense. Past tense, first person. So as an example, I slumped down onto the nearest chair and held my head in my hands. I couldn't quite grasp what I'd been told. So this would be perfect. It's past tense, it's first person, and look at the tenses and look at the fact we've used first person throughout the whole of those sentences. I, my, it's all first person. And tenses, slumped, held, couldn't, I'd been told. They're all past. We're keeping them nice and secure. We're not diverting from our tense. Okay. An example of something that might not be the best or could lose marks. I am slumping down onto the nearest chair and held my head in my hands. I can't quite grasp what I'd been told. There's a complete wavering of tenses. And that's definitely something that can be overlooked. Okay, so that's a definite one to look out for. That's tip number 4. I'm sorry, guys, if this is laggy. Quite a few people are saying that it is lagging, but this session is being recorded. So you can always go back at a later time, and we're going to share it in the group, and I'm also going to put it on my YouTube channel. I think Saba also has a YouTube one. SPAG stands for spelling, punctuation and grammar. Good. Okay. Tip number 5. Use paragraphs and conjunctions to build structure. So we've spoken quite a lot about sentences and how we can vary the pace of our sentences. So this tip is kind of dedicated to that. And I like to think about it almost as if we are building a brick wall. And each brick represents an idea. So your child will have an idea that they want to write about. Next level of the wall, they might link that idea with another idea, and they're going to cement those bricks together using something that connects ideas. Anyone want to comment what those types of words are? So we'll have an idea and another idea, and we can cement them together to create a sentence. The word is on the screen. I'm just waiting for comments. I know there is a delay. So we have ideas cemented together. Conjunctions, well done, Meenakshi Budia, well done, conjunctions, yep. So we take an idea and we cement it together with another idea using a conjunction. That builds a compound sentence or a complex sentence, dependent on the type of conjunction that you use. So then we have sentences, and we don't just want a block of sentences all together on that page. We want to have some paragraphs, okay? Paragraphs, CSSE ask us for around, it's been between 6 and 8 sentences. So it's not actually that long at all. But it must never be underestimated, because basically your child will have to work harder to put the best that they can into each sentence. And what I'd recommend is you start with 2 sentences, leave a line, move on to another aspect of whatever you're talking about or writing about, then another 2 sentences, leave a line, and then 2 to 3 sentences, something like that. Okay, so like a 2, 2, 3 setup, something like that would be marvelous. And the examiners really, really appreciate the use of paragraphs. Now remember, in the mark scheme that we just had a look at, which was the marking criteria, if your child does not use paragraphs and doesn't structure their writing using conjunctions, they run the risk of getting a band 1 for structure. So that means they could get band 4 in ideas, vocab and spelling, grammar, punctuation, but if the structure isn't there, they run that risk of losing marks and bringing that right down. So think about it like that brick wall, building that brick wall, keep things separate and build structure. And this is the criteria here. Band 2, no paragraphs, basic sentence structure. Band 1, no paragraphs, no sentence structure. So that's literally just ideas on a page, not structured effectively. Okay, guys, we've got 2 more points to go through. Thank you so much for listening. 2 more points. Point number 6, be creative with punctuation. So I said earlier about how the examiner would hate for your child to just be using full stops and commas. Okay, these are the most basic form of punctuation. I'm just going to hope that this is okay connection-wise. Yeah. So, tips. Jot down a punctuation bank. So when your child is actually trying out a question, whether this is at home or this is for a mock exam or for the real exam, get them to jot down a punctuation bank, all of the different types of punctuation that they can think of. Choose the right tools for the job, just like point number 2. Choose the right punctuation. So we spoke a little bit about instructions. If it's instructions, that's something that is usually, it's non-fiction, right? It's realistic. So for non-fictional writing, things like brackets are really, really effective if you want to create a pause or some extra information in a sentence. So brackets are really effective. If it's something that is a little bit more imaginary, fictional, then things like the humble hyphen/dash, really, really good for parenthesis. Parenthesis is when you're adding extra information into a sentence. So really, really effective. The semicolon is actually my favourite. And I'll tell you why, because it's so easy to use. Once you've got it, you know it, you can use it. When we were talking about compound sentences, you have an idea, then a conjunction, then an idea, linking them together. A semicolon can actually just replace that conjunction. So let's think of an example. Idea 1. I won't be going to my friend's house today. Idea 2. It's raining like cats and dogs. It's raining cats and dogs. Okay. Most kids would probably just put a conjunction in the middle. I won't be going to my friend's house today because it's raining cats and dogs. The humble semicolon comes in and you just swap it for your conjunction. I won't be going to my friend's house today, semicolon, it's raining cats and dogs. The 2 parts are related, they have to be related, but instead of using a conjunction, we've just used a semicolon. How easy is that? So easy to do. Okay, so use your punctuation bank, choose the right tools for the job, and finally impress the examiner. Get really creative with stuff. Use an ellipsis. An ellipsis, the ... 3 dots. Really, really good for suspense. Really, really good for suspense. Colons as well, completely underestimated. Colons are great if you're trying to almost provide like a question and an answer aspect to a sentence. Okay, right, last one. Can you use idioms? Yeah, of course you can. Of course you can. Again, don't use anything too much. Everything in moderation. So if it's something a bit more non-fictional, like instructions, then you wouldn't put lots and lots of idioms in there. Idioms are great if you're talking about things that have happened, so recounts, describing, things like that. Last tip, guys. Some people asking how long's left. Sorry, I know I've absolutely bored you to death. Okay, make every sentence count. Each sentence has to contain something impressive. Remember, the CSSE exam, they're asking for around 6 to 8 sentences. It's not much at all. And if we compare it to like independent exams, you know, your child might have a creative writing task that they can spend 30 minutes on, 40 minutes. It might just be one question. But this, with the both questions, it's 6 to 8 sentences for each of them. We have to make every sentence count. We absolutely have to. So, I actually watched a video this week from Alexander Rosenberg, who is head of Linky Thinks. And this video is amazing, and it's similar to this technique. He calls this technique slow writing. And it's really the same concept. It's using something impressive in every single sentence. So don't just write a sentence for the sake of making up time or making up writing. Use a sentence because you're going to wow that examiner with something. So it might be some super vocabulary. It could be a metaphor. It could be that you start it with a fronted adverbial. It could be semicolon, used for semicolon. Or maybe you want to get really creative and talk about or use a 3-word sentence. Sometimes we call it the power of 3 when it's a form of repetition when we just use 3 words in a sentence. So 1 word, comma, 2 word, comma, 3 words, power of 3. Could be when you're talking about your emotions. Dread, comma, guilt, comma, anxiety, full stop. How effective is that? Just those 3 words, power of 3, 3-word sentence. Okay. So those are my 7 tips. And I really, really hope that they've helped you out, guys. I really, really hope that this has helped prepare you, whether your child is sitting the exam this year or next year. Okay, both are obviously apt for this session. So I thank you so much for tuning in. I'm just going to, whilst I'm still here, I'm going to just read through some of the comments and just answer a few questions if I can. How long should sentences be? Entirely depends on the task itself. It doesn't matter how long they are, as long as each one is different. One might be shorter, one might be longer. Vary that pace, vary the pace. Yeah. Vida, I have a whole page of notes written down. This is amazing. Thank you so much, Lucy. Oh, you're very welcome. It's been an absolute pleasure. Guys, if you have any other questions, please go ahead and ask. Could you please tell if instructions need an introduction? In most cases, instructions do need an introduction. For CSSE, I would advise your child to just take up one sentence with a very short introduction. Can you write extra sentences? That's a really good question, actually. Now, I have seen tutors, tuition centres make it really strict about how much a child writes. The key to remember is sorry, I've just seen someone has said you've spelled turning wrong. It's not supposed to be turning, that's why. Yeah, so the key to remember is if the question says aim to write between 6 and 8 sentences, then your child should aim to write between 6 and 8 sentences. If it says do not write more than 8 sentences, your child will know they can't write more than 8 sentences. If they do, they're kind of just proving that they can't necessarily read the instructions given. Okay. Name of the YouTube program. My channel is Learning with Lucy UK. A million thanks. Yeah. Amazing. Okay, so guys, thank you for tuning in. Stay calm, stay safe given the situation. I hope you are all doing okay and your families too. Make revision fun, okay? So if your child is sitting the exam this year, for example, don't kind of bog them down with lots and lots of exam papers. You know, most of them have gone back to school. They want just almost like a brain break. So revision needs to be fun. Focus on those key areas that maybe they struggle with a little. It could be vocab, and do some games, vocab games, crosswords, things like that. Make it fun. No pressure on them. There's already been so much pressure given the situation. Lots and lots of people saying thank you. Yeah, you're very welcome. And good luck as well, guys. Good luck in this journey. A huge thanks again to Saba. It's just such a privilege to have done this session, and I've really, really enjoyed it. And also Sheena, who has been my wing woman. And what a wing woman to have. She's been answering your questions, which is great. So I do hope you all stay safe and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Okay.